Hello everybody, it's Mrs. Pound and we're studying a new chapter, chapter 19 on ecology from BJU Biology's 4th edition. Today we're going to start taking a look at section 19A on the ecosystem. And to start out, we're going to look at subsections 19.1 on the nature of ecology and 19.2a on abiotic factors. So our objectives will be to describe the typical responsibilities of an ecologist, define ecosystem and give examples, list common abiotic factors and tell how they work together to create different living conditions, and trace the steps of the water cycle. So first of all, we have to know what we're studying when we talk about ecology. Ecology is the science of the relationships between an organism and its environment. So we see this beaver in the background. So we would be studying how this beaver interacts with its environment and with other living organisms as well. Three responsibilities of ecologists are studying relationships between existing organisms and their environment. So, for example, studying the ecosystems and the relationships between all of these animals in this picture and their environment. Recommending how to use a natural resource wisely. So, for instance, how do we log without totally destroying the environment and the habitat for different organisms in that environment? How do we use our resources wisely and effectively to meet our needs and also the needs of other living things? And predicting what would happen if some environmental factors were changed. For instance, if we put in a dam like the Hoover Dam, how will that impact different species in the river, and will they still be able to thrive, or would it cause some of them perhaps to go to extinct? So just taking a look at those types of things. So first of all, we need to know what an ecosystem is. An ecosystem is the total system of interactions between living organisms and non-living things and factors within a limited area. So an ecosystem can be as small as a drop of water or a mud puddle. It could be a pond. It could be an entire forest. It could even be the entire earth. It depends on what you are looking at. In ecosystems, there are abiotic factors. An abiotic factor is a non-living aspect of an ecosystem. So first we're going to take a look at those things that are non-living that affect an ecosystem. One of those things is fire. So a natural factor in some ecosystems is fire. And we think of fire as being bad, but in fact, one species of pine will release its seeds only if the cones are exposed to fire. God did create certain organisms to reproduce only if there is a fire, and they do this because they live in fire-prone areas, and so God made them so that they would respond to that fire and restore the ecosystem if it is destroyed. So out west, when we see these wildfires, actually part of the reason the wildfires are so bad is because we have suppressed the fires for too long. Their purpose is to clean up the environment, and then God did make organisms to replenish that after the destruction. An important factor that we're going to look at is the water cycle, because without water on this planet, there would be no life. Now, when we look at the water cycle, there are two types of radiation that are involved somewhat, and they are heat and light that we get from the sun. Light is important for photosynthesis, and heat is very important for the water cycle. And these are both abiotic factors because they're non-living that affect the ecosystem. Moving water on the surface of the ground is called runoff. So we need to understand that for the water cycle. So we see here all this land around here. If it was to rain, that rain would run off into this river. So that is runoff. Now, important aspects of the water cycle are evaporation and transpiration. Evaporation is when water turns from liquid to gas. So right now, water is evaporating off of this river. Also, transpiration. This is water released by plants into the atmosphere. So that water goes up. It goes up and it forms clouds in the sky. And then when there's enough water up there, it comes back down as precipitation. Okay, it falls back down as precipitation. And there is percolation. Percolation is where the water is absorbed into the ground, and that can become groundwater. And runoff, like we just talked about, it runs off the land because not all of it can be absorbed. It depends on how dry the land is, what is on the land, how much gets absorbed into the ground. And the rest is runoff that goes into this river to replenish lakes and rivers and ponds and those sorts of water resources. And so you see that cycle going on. And when it runs off, it will evaporate and it will transpire from the plants, from the percolation, and keep going around and around and around. Now, different abiotic factors interact with the water cycle that you probably haven't really thought about. So let's take and analyze each one of these. First of all, if the sun did not warm the atmosphere, evaporation would stop. So the heat from the sun is essential. The heat of the sun and the rotation of the earth cause the winds that move the moisture-laden air. So wind will move this air. This ensures that the rain does not fall only over the oceans, which is where the evaporation takes place. So most of the evaporation is over the ocean. There's also a lot of evaporation over the rainforest from transpiration. But if the wind did not move that, it would only rain in those places, and the rest of the planet would be left without rain. So winds and rotation of the earth are very important. And if gravity did not pull the rain down, gravity is another abiotic factor, then runoff water, groundwater, lakes, and oceans would not form. Without gravity, that water would not return to the surface of the earth, and we would not have that nice cycle going on. So our objectives were to describe the typical responsibilities of an ecologist, define ecosystem and give examples, list common abiotic factors and tell how they work together to create different living conditions, and trace the steps of the water cycle. So don't forget your 5 questions in your margin, and to continue watching the video at the end to answer the questions.